Have you ever wondered what would happen if the political divide between our country ever reached a boiling point and we indeed embarked upon a civil war? Well, now there's a whole movie about it, and I watched it so you don't have to. Although, you might want to. Hey freethinkers, Chandler here, and we're gonna try something a little different today. I went out and watched the brand new A24 film, Civil War, a film that had such an aggressive marketing budget. I don't know if they wanted me specifically to watch it or all of America to watch it, but it was a film indeed, and I'm gonna break it all down for you guys. Ever since 2016, at least, with the election between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, so many people have been saying, oh, if Trump's elected, I want to move to Canada, or, oh, if Hillary's elected, we're going to go to war. And the same thing happened in the 2020 election, except it went even further. As you guys know, the election between Donald Trump and Joe Biden is highly contested, with the victory of Joe Biden. So there's the main United States of America. This comprises basically most of the Northeast. So they didn't actually break down any states, although they did briefly show a map which had some of the states labeled in colors. If I find that, I'll show that on screen now. I didn't take a picture of it in the theater, but it's most of the northeastern states, Maine, New York, I believe Virginia, and a few others. And then it's the southern states, but not all of them. This southern faction is called the Florida Alliance, and we don't actually see much of the Florida Alliance within the movie. They're kind of just there, but it comprises obviously Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, but a very big missing state is Texas. Texas is not in the Florida Alliance because it is in the Third Alliance. Now, you'll maybe assuming, oh, Third Alliance is probably Texas all on its own. No, Texas and California united under one banner with 2 stars. Actually, they showed the flag in the movie. I quite liked it. I made a note of it, in fact. The banner is the normal United States flag with 2 stars, so I guess it's supposed to be California and Texas. Now, I don't know what type of alternate history universe we'd see Texas and California on the same side in a civil war in, but maybe that was the point, to try and turn things up over their heads. Let's jump into what's undoubtedly the most important piece of the puzzle when it comes to a good movie, and particularly this one, and that's our main cast of characters. Those would be Joel, Sammy, Lee, and Jesse, and all 4 of them, as previously mentioned, are journalists that are embedded within various factions of this war. Now, Jesse is the youngest of the bunch, and what I'd say is maybe the second most important character in the movie, and she's the younger lady. I think they said she's about 23, and she, like the others, is a wartime photographer, but she's still a little green. And during the first scene of the movie, in fact, we get to see a little bit of that. But then moving up the chain, we have Lee, who I'd say is the most important, the main protagonist of the story. And she's kind of your grizzled veteran journalist who speaks during the movie about being deployed to many wars in the past and taking videos and pictures of them and saying, oh, I sure hope this doesn't happen to America. That would be bad. I sent these pictures and video home to show that this is what we shouldn't do, and that's what ended up happening. Joel and Sammy are the 2 males of the story, and we're going to talk a bit more about Sammy later. And then Joel was pretty important to the story as well, but he was, I'd say, definitely more so comedic relief. Although he had a few really important emotional moments during the movie as well. Jumping into the first scene, which really sets the tone for the movie, takes place during a protest in New York City, where there are starved, hungry, survivor citizens in the streets of New York that obviously look embattled and are in front of a group of riot police that are holding up batons, and they're standing in front of a truck of water. And so the police are getting a little rowdy, the protesters, rioters are getting a little rowdy, and things start to get violent. Now in we get our 3 or so main protagonists in the story, once again, Lee, Jesse, and Joel. Now we have Lee and Joel, who are obviously veterans of this, taking pictures, video. They have their yellow press stuff, they have Kevlar vests, all that. But then we have Jesse, the young lady, who's there, and she's just enamored with all of it, and gets a little too close to the action and gets hit. Now that is when Lee steps in and guides Jesse out of the way and says, here, Jesse, put on, or obviously she doesn't know her name yet, but put on this vest, the yellow vest, and says, next time I see you, you better have a Kevlar, all that. And immediately Jesse recognizes Lee and says, oh my gosh, you're this person, you're my hero, you're the reason why I'm doing this photography stuff in the first place. So everybody treats her, like a baby. They want to protect her, they want to take care of her. And so after the protest is over, well, I should say actually before the protest is over. The reason it ends is because somebody blows themselves up. It's one of the most important moments in the movie, I'd say, because it shows you how gruesome and evil war can really get. And this moment that causes the end of the protest is because somebody picks up an American flag, and it's unknown whether it's a normal American flag or the Western Front flag, but they pick up this American flag and they start running at the crowd and at the police. And Lee, I guess, has seen this thing before because she tells Jesse, hey, get down, get down. And then a giant explosion happens, and there's stuff thrown everywhere and people get hurt. Lee, of course, is taking pictures of it, so she's supposed to do as a journalist, and people die. And it's a gruesome moment that sets the tone for the story of the movie. Continuing the tone forward, we move to a hotel where our journalists are now meeting up with the fourth player in the story, and that's Sammy. He's the most veteran of them all. He's a big, older gentleman. I couldn't tell if he was black or not. I assume he was, or maybe like mixed race, and I don't really think it was important to the story, but he definitely filled a slot in the movie insofar as being that seasoned character, even more so than Lee, to show like, oh, I've been around for all this, I've seen all of this. And they're talking about various things, especially in regards to the war, and they're talking about how the Western Front, consisting of Texas and California, is approaching Washington, D.C., and they expect the war to potentially be over any day now. So they're all hatching a plan to get down there to D.C. That is when Jesse comes up and says, hey, I want to go with y'all. And Lee is not a fan of it, but it happens anyway. Or at least Lee approaches the car the next morning and sees Jesse and is like, okay, why are we doing this? What are we doing? But it ends up going that way anyways. Next up, we arrive at a gas station and we get some of those really awkward scenes where you see people that are just survivors of the war, reluctant. I actually noticed a really funny thing where they were trying to get gas and the guy was like, we ain't giving you no gas.
300.
300 buys you a sandwich.
300 Canadian.
Okay.
But in this scene, we see Jesse start to walk over to a separate area behind the gas station and sees two men that are strung up by their hands, further showing how disgusting and painful this war has become. Now, I could go scene by scene as this movie goes and break down everything, but I want to take a step back and touch on some more really important points of this movie. It shows that in this type of situation, there's no winners or losers. Now, I want to fast forward a little bit to one of the scenes that really made me chuckle in the theater, but sort of like a really nervous chuckle. And that's the scene that they've shown a really big amount of in the commercials. And that's the scene where there's two gentlemen, and it's really funny. One of the gentlemen is wearing these glasses, but he's talking to these journalists. He's holding them hostage, in fact. And one of the journalists says, hey man, stop, we're Americans. And the guy responds, he says,
okay, what kind of American are you?
What kind of Americans are you? Which is just, it really makes you think different things about the movie. It makes you think, wow, where have we arrived at in this country, at least in this movie world, where they're saying, what kind of American are you? Now, another really pivotal moment in this movie was one of my favorite moments. It's when they're continuing on their drive down. I believe they've made it somewhere to West Virginia. They've covered a few shootings and they've seen some really heavy battles, and Lee and Jesse have really started to get really dialed in, particularly Jesse. She's been through a lot by this point in the movie and is kind of more battle hardened. But as they're driving down south through the eastern seaboard of America, they get into this town that looks almost like nothing has happened to it. And so far in this movie, just to give you context, all we've seen in America is war zones and people bleeding on the streets and burnt buildings and helicopters downed in mall parking lots. So we drive through this city or this small town, and there's green grass and people walking down the sidewalk and sprinklers running and storefronts that aren't looted, but in fact are selling items still. And so our characters start to talk about this. Sammy, who's the older gentleman, says, this is something I never thought I'd see again. Lee says, wow, I haven't seen something like this since I was very young. And I imagine Jesse hadn't seen that ever in her life. One of the biggest problems I witnessed within this movie, though, was that it was really difficult to get attached to any of the characters other than the two leading ladies. And, Joel and Sammy, I could definitely get get attached to Sammy. Joel, not so much. There was a few scenes he was definitely comedic relief, and in those scenes you could also get really emotionally attached to him, but that's only in those scenes. But the biggest example of this is two other gentlemen we run into in the middle of the movie for some reason, and they're driving a car, and the car pulls up, and they get all nervous until they realize it's their two friends. And so Jesse hops in their car, and they start driving like crazy until they run up on the people that were throwing bodies out of a truck, and they're holding them hostage. And that's the scene I mentioned previously where it's like, you know, what kind of American are you? In this scene, these two gentlemen, whose names I can't even remember, I think one of them was Trey or something, we don't even get to learn their names because before we even get to know them, they get shot and killed, which I guess is supposed to show that, you know, things can happen quickly and it's hard to be attached to people. But I feel like if they had given us a bit more time with these characters, we could have really gotten connected to them. And that's not just those two side characters that honestly you could say are minor characters, but even the supporting cast and the main cast, it was hard to get really connected to them because it felt like it didn't give us enough time. What I think the movie really had was pacing issues. Now, a good movie is supposed to have plenty of slow moments that jump into high moments in a sort of like a roller coaster. This movie started off really up high insofar as, you know, something crazy is happening, and then just absolutely tanked down. And then would have a few moments where it's like, you know, dipping left and right. We see, you know, some really gruesome things and cars on the road and some of the previous scenes I already mentioned, but it would just kind of stay super slow. It was like it was just really dragging you along. And then of course there'd be a few moments where, oh no, some character we barely know gets shot and killed by the guy who says, "What kind of American are you?" And then after that scene, we actually have Sammy die as well. And it's just like, it felt like the movie didn't earn the right to kill off these characters that we were already struggling to get to know. But now we get to the end of the movie, and I can definitely say this was a front, or I guess back heavy movie, because the last 20 minutes of it are an absolute chef's kiss. We go through all these scenes of where they're driving to places, they're meeting people, they're losing people, they're going through crazy things, they're having a nice time. But we get to the end of the movie where the Western Front is finally marching on Washington, D.C., and this is the moment where you lean forward in your seat in the theater or your couch at home once this inevitably goes to streaming, and you put the popcorn down, you stop drinking out of the soda, and you're really dialed in, because this is when it gets hectic. Any movie that's going to portray Washington, D.C. being invaded by enemy forces, or I guess liberators in this movie, I don't know, you've got to nail it. And this movie nailed it. We see all of the monuments being attacked and gunfire happening and the monuments collapsing from rockets being fired at them. And then we get to the White House. Now this is when things get really crazy. So there's some intel that the president is still in the building, and they start shooting at the White House and knocking down the gates. And then the Beast, which is, you know, the presidential limo, starts to drive out, and they knock the Beast over, but the president isn't in it. So as they start clearing rooms in the White House, they run into Secret Service agents. One of them is trying to negotiate for the surrender or the release of the president, and the military forces are having none of it. They pop her, and they move on, and it's just a firefight down some halls. Now, by this point, our journalist team is like a crack team. Lee is on it, Jesse is on it, Joel is on it, but Jesse has become like some sort of surgical assassin. She's, you know, swaying left and right, going through hallways. She really shouldn't be. It's very dangerous, but it's like over the course of the movie, she became hardened. And so as we finally get into the last little bit and we get to the final hallway where there's a few soldiers, and this is where I think the movie could have done so much better. This is the crescendo, the apex of all the things we had seen coming, and I feel like they really dropped the ball. And that is because they kill the main character, Lee. Now, it's been very difficult to get attached to anybody in this movie, and obviously, even in a movie where you get really well attached to characters and they kill one off, that isn't always a bad thing. But I felt like in this movie, they did it wrong, because it was Lee trying to save Jesse, not in like a, oh no, Jesse's getting jumped out at, but Jesse made a poor mistake. She walked in the middle of a hallway right when they were about to jump out and shoot. And so Lee jumped in the way of the gunfire and took the bullet for Jesse, which I think is, you know, a fantastic move for her character, but not so great for the movie as a whole. And now, thankfully, the movie does redeem itself with some amazing visuals. Jesse on the ground in front of where Lee was shot took just these beautiful pictures of the moment Lee starts to fall to the ground. And this is a motif that the movie uses consistently throughout its runtime, in which when somebody takes a picture, a lot of the times the movie will pause and show you what that picture looks like, showing a soldier who's falling to the ground after being shot, or showing cars pulled off on the side of I-95, or something crazy like that, something that you wouldn't see in your normal day-to-day life, but is viewed through the lens of a camera. And last but not least, we finally reach the full end, the falling action of the movie, where we are at the president. He's got his hands up, he's on the ground actually, and they're like, you know, any last words? In fact, Joel, whose whole thing throughout the movie was he wanted to interview the president, gets down, he stops the soldiers from shooting, and he says, I need a quote. And the president, in his meager words, just says, don't let them kill me. And Joel just says, that's all I needed. And they fire on the president, and the movie ends right there. So we don't really get any satisfaction. We don't get to see, you know, happy endings. We don't get to see a parade or anything. It's just violence that begets violence. And I think that is the theme of the movie as a whole. Wrapping all of this entire story up into one neat little bow, I'd say the number one thing to remember from this is actually said in the movie. Don't let this become a reality. The way I'll leave things is, if you guys get the chance to see this movie, I would definitely go out and see it. I was very entertained by it. I believe most of the other people in the theater were rather entertained. I heard some laughing, I heard some gasps, so it's definitely a movie that won't leave you bored, mostly. If you do find yourself getting bored, I'd say hold on as long as you can. It gets better, especially at the end, as far as pacing goes. Definitely give it a watch if you can. Aside from all that, thank you guys so much for watching this different type of video of mine. I know it wasn't necessarily political, but I believe it touched on something very interesting, and I really appreciate you guys sticking with me through it. If you'd like to just directly support the channel, you can go to donorbox.org/support-Chandler to donate so that I can keep doing content like this, recording videos, normally about political things, but maybe occasionally about a really interesting and thought-provoking movie like this. Thank you guys so much for watching, and don't forget to spread the virus of intelligence.